8,000 clay soldiers stand in a field outside Xi'an. They are not the discovery. They are the fence around it. 1.5 kilometers to the west there is a low green hill, and under that hill is a tomb that no one has opened in 2,200 years. We know how deep it is. We know how big it is. We know, roughly, what is leaking out of it. And China has decided not to look. In 246 before the Common Era, a 13-year-old named Ying became king of Qian, the hardest and most militarized of the warring states. The historian Xi'an says the digging at Mount Lai began almost at once in the boy king's first year on the throne. He was building his tomb before he had built anything else. Then, in 9 years, he took the world. Han fell first, then Zhao, then Wei, whose capital was drowned when the king cut the river dikes, then Chu, then Yan, and finally Kai, which surrendered without a fight. 6 kingdoms, 9 years. In 221 before the Common Era there was nothing left to conquer, so he invented a title that had never existed. Xi'an, first August Emperor. His line, he said, would rule for 10,000 generations. What he did next is the reason he still matters. One script, imposed by decree. One currency. One set of weights and measures. Even the axles of carts were standardized, so that every wagon in the empire ran in the same ruts. He did not just win China, he compressed it into a single machine. The machine ran on people. Over 300,000 men went north with the general Meng Tan to link the frontier walls into the ancestor of the Great Wall. Another force cut the Lingqu Canal, 34 kilometers, joining the Yangtze system to the Pearl. How many died building it is not recorded anywhere. In 213 he ordered the histories of the conquered states burned, along with private copies of the classics. The other half of the legend, that he buried 460 scholars alive, is much weaker than people think. It appears in one source written a century later, and the word Sima used probably just meant killed. Something happened. Live burial is a later embellishment. And then the man who had beaten everything went looking for the one thing he could not beat. He sent a court magician named Zufu east across the sea with hundreds of young men and women to find the immortal mountain of Pinglai. They never came back. He went to the coast 3 times to wait. In the meantime, his alchemists fed him preparations that, by the standards of the age, were medicine. Many of them contained mercury. In the summer of 210, on his 5th tour of the empire, he died. He was 49. The cause is still unknown, and the mercury theory is a hypothesis, not a finding. What happened next is not in doubt. The chancellor Lai Si and the eunuch Xiao Gao hid the death. They were 2 months from the capital in high summer, so they filled carts with rotting fish and drove them in front of and behind the imperial wagon to cover the smell. Meals were carried in. Messages were carried out. For 2 months, an empire took orders from a corpse. They forged the succession, killed the rightful heir, and buried him at Mount Lai. Xi'an, writing about a century afterwards, gives us the only ancient description of what went in. 700,000 men, bronze poured for the outer coffin, crossbows rigged to fire on anyone entering, mercury made to flow mechanically, standing in for the 100 rivers, the Yangtze, the Yellow River, and the sea, the constellations above, the land below, and when it was sealed, the inner passage was blocked and the outer gate dropped, tapping the workmen inside. Sima never mentions the Terracotta army, not once. 4 years after the burial, the empire was in open revolt and the general Zhang He pulled the entire tomb workforce off the site to fight it. The mausoleum was never finished. Pit 4 is empty, abandoned mid-build. The dynasty of 10,000 generations lasted 15 years. The pits burned, charred roof timbers, fire damage on the figures, and almost all of the real weapons gone. Later accounts blame the warlord Zhang Yu, and he did burn the Qin palaces, but the identification is an inference from texts written afterwards by the winning side, not something the ground has proved. Then the roofs collapsed, the earth came down, and the mound went quiet. Trees grew on it. Villages grew around it. For over 2,000 years it was a hill with pomegranate orchards on it, and nobody knew what was underneath. In March 1974 there was a drought, and 7 men from Xi'an village went looking for water. Yang Jifa, his 5 brothers, and a neighbor. About 2 meters down they hit hard-packed earth, then broken red pottery. Then ahead. They thought it was a temple idol, and bad luck. Some of the bricks went home to be used as pillows. The bronze arrowheads were sold for scrap. A local archaeologist, Zhao Kaiman, bought the fragments back and began gluing them together from pieces the size of a fingernail. What he was reassembling turned out to run for 230 meters in 11 parallel corridors. In 50 years of digging, more than 2,000 life-sized figures had actually been recovered. The estimate for what is still down there is around 8,000, and it is an extrapolation, not a count. They were painted cinnabar red, malachite green, azurite blue, and a synthetic purple that chemists think came out of alchemists trying to manufacture jade. When the lacquer underneath meets the dry air of Xi'an, it curls in about 15 seconds and flakes off in about 4 minutes. Every gray warrior you have ever seen in a photograph was, very briefly, in color. The faces are the famous part. No two excavated figures are identical, which is true, but the romantic version is wrong. Scholars have identified roughly 10 base molds. Heads, arms, torsos, and legs were made separately on a production line, then finished by hand until each one became a particular man. The workshops were legally required to stamp their names on the output, because this was quality control. The most individual portraiture in the ancient world exists because of an audit rule. Which brings us back to the hill. Starting in the 1980s, soil surveys on the mound found mercury far above the local background, with the peaks concentrated in the center. In 2016, a research team pointed a laser at the mound from 650 meters away and measured mercury in the open air above it, in the same places the soil surveys had flagged. That is consistent with a very large buried mercury source. It is not a measurement of the inside. Nobody has ever been inside. Robber tunnels have been found, but the deepest of them stopped at the outer wall. So we sit with this. A chamber about 80 meters by 50, some 30 meters down, with mercury seeping up through the earth above it. The technology to excavate something that size without destroying it does not exist yet, and the precedent everyone points to is a Ming tomb opened in the 1950s, where the contents rotted because nobody knew how to save them. So the first emperor is still down there, under a hill with trees on it, guarded by an army he never got to see finished. And the most interesting archaeological site on Earth is the one we are deliberately leaving shut.